Greetings everyone, I'm Detective STARBORN, and I'm glad to see you on my YouTube channel. Please be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on new and interesting videos. Thank you and enjoy watching. A woman left work and disappeared without a trace under strange circumstances. Police joined the search and quickly found several rather chilling leads that indicated something terrible may have happened to her. But despite this, the investigation dragged on for a long 25 years, and only recently there was an unexpected breakthrough that allowed the truth to be learned. Kim Langwell was born on December 24, 1965 in the American city of Houston, Texas. She lived there with her parents and sister, had many friends, and stood out for her determination from childhood. When she was 18, Kim had a daughter, Tiffany, but shortly after the girl's father left them, and Kim was forced to support and raise her daughter alone. She moved to a small town called Beaumont, where she began to build her own life and tried to provide Tiffany with everything she needed. At first it was quite difficult, and Kim sometimes had to juggle 3 jobs, but later she got a good position at a local oil refining company, which allowed her to devote more time to her daughter. At the same job, she met a man named Ken, and they began dating. Sometime later, they got engaged and began to make plans for their future together. On July 9, 1999, when Kim was 34, she planned to spend the evening at a restaurant with Ken and her daughter, who was 15 at the time. The woman was supposed to finish her shift at work around 5 o'clock, then go home and head to the restaurant. Around 5:15, she called Tiffany and told her about these plans. The woman also added that before going home, she would need to finish some things, and she would arrive a little later. Around 6:30, Ken arrived at her house, but the woman was still not there. They tried to call her, but Kim wasn't picking up, which seemed rather strange. Closer to 10 o'clock in the evening, Ken decided to go searching and drove along the woman's route from work to home. Then he drove around stores and other places where Kim might theoretically be, but she was nowhere to be found. This continued until the man noticed her car. It was parked in a parking lot next to a pharmacy, but Kim herself was not inside. The woman could not be found anywhere near the pharmacy either, and Ken assumed that she might have simply changed her mind about having dinner together and gone somewhere else. The man thought she might have left with one of her acquaintances and left her car in the parking lot, although this seemed a little odd to him. Despite this, he still hoped that she was all right and went home. The next morning, Ken returned to that pharmacy and found that the woman's car was still parked there. Considering that Kim had not returned home and had not contacted any of her loved ones, the man began to seriously worry and eventually called the police. After hearing all this information, the officers immediately got involved in the case and first examined Kim's car. Inside, there were no signs of a struggle or blood, but her cell phone was lying there, which seemed very suspicious. Then, they talked to Kim's daughter, who was the last to speak to her mother on the phone. Tiffany said that after work, her mom planned to stop by a man named Terry, with whom she had been in a relationship for 7 years. Despite the fact that they broke up more than 6 months ago, Terry sometimes kept in touch with her, and that evening, he asked her to help with repairs. The man needed to nail a few shelves, and in order to do it evenly, someone had to hold them. Tiffany called him on the evening of her mother's disappearance, but Terry said that she only stopped by for a few minutes and left. After talking to Kim's friends, the police found out that her relationship with Terry was quite problematic. Initially, when the woman first started dating him, he seemed like a good person to her friends, but this impression quickly changed. Terry began to behave more and more aggressively and tried to control Kim's every move. He constantly called her and asked where and with whom she was spending time. He demanded that the woman obey him in everything and constantly made scenes. Eventually, Kim decided to break up with him, but this turned out to be not so easy. Terry tried in every way to prevent her, both with promises to change and with threats and reprisals if she left him. Despite this, the woman nevertheless left him, and since then, Terry had not made any active attempts to get her back. However, the man continued to regularly contact her and tried to take part in her life. And Kim was afraid that if she completely broke off contact with him, he could harm her or her daughter. From conversations with the woman's friends, the police learned that shortly before the breakup, Terry began to raise his hand to her and once even began to strangle her. After that, Kim was seriously afraid that Terry could go even further. One day, the woman even told her friends that if she ever disappeared, they should look for her buried in Terry's yard. All this, as well as the fact that Kim stopped by to see him shortly before disappearing, made the detectives seriously consider his involvement. They went to talk to the man, but he denied any connection to Kim's disappearance. According to him, the woman only stayed for a few minutes, helped him nail the shelves, and left. Terry also told police that about 4 hours after her visit, he went to a local bar where he spent the rest of the evening. Thus, the man had no alibi at the time of her disappearance, but the motive was quite obvious. Detectives obtained a warrant to search his home, examined the entire area, but found no trace of Kim's belongings, no blood, or any other clues there. Forensic experts examined the woman's car, but there were no clues there either that could link Terry to Kim's disappearance. As a result, the police were unable to establish his involvement, but soon a new suspect appeared before them. The woman's acquaintances said that Kim had repeatedly complained to them about her boss named Frank. Soon after she got a job, the man began to show her attention and openly flirt with her, despite the fact that he was married. Later, Frank began to write her love letters in which he tried to convince the woman to start dating him. Over time, he wrote more than 100 such letters, and Kim was uncomfortable with the whole situation. She feared that one day Frank could fire her because she did not reciprocate his feelings. The woman also passed all these letters on to her friends in case something happened to her. The police read these letters, and their content clearly indicated that Frank was literally obsessed with her. In addition, Kim said that the man drove past her house several times a day at a slow speed and sometimes parked opposite and just watched her. It is noteworthy that Ken, the woman's current boyfriend, also worked at this company, but this did not interfere with Frank's obsession in any way. Considering all of the above, the investigators began to seriously think about his possible involvement. Kim disappeared shortly after leaving work, and Frank had several motives to do something like this. Firstly, his obsession could have reached the point where he decided to kidnap Kim. Secondly, the man might have feared that the woman would tell everything to the management or his wife. In either of these scenarios, he would face serious problems, so he might have decided to kidnap her. The police went to talk to him, but the man claimed that in fact he did not have any serious feelings for Kim, but rather a fleeting infatuation that had long since passed. He also denied writing letters to the woman, despite the fact that the investigators had all of them. Thus, Frank's behavior seemed very strange to the detectives, and they were in no hurry to take his word for it. The man also claimed that he had an alibi, but here too, everything turned out to be rather contradictory. Frank provided the police with a store receipt where he was at 1856, but in theory, he still had enough time to commit the kidnapping. Later that evening, he organized a poker game with his friends, and they confirmed that Frank was indeed with them. But he still had more than an hour from the time Kim left work, and there was no alibi for that time. Despite this, the police could not find any evidence that would indicate his involvement, so they continued to study other potential leads. Investigators tried to find surveillance camera footage along Kim's route from home to Terry's and the parking lot where her car was found, but this led nowhere. They also obtained data on her phone activity and found that the last time the woman called was to her daughter and did not contact anyone else. As a result, the detectives focused on the search, going to comb the city and its environs. They recruited volunteers and also appealed to the public to share information that could shed light on what happened. But despite all this, the police still could not get closer to finding Kim. At the same time, they continued to receive reports of very strange behavior on Terry's part. A few days after her disappearance, Kim's sister went to the man's house, since she, like all of Kim's other relatives, suspected him. However, Terry apparently not only did not worry about Kim, but openly mocked her relatives. Another interesting observation came from Terry's employees. He owned a small business, and his office was located on his home property, so workers regularly stopped by. One of them said that on that day he arrived at Terry's around 5:50, and Kim's car was parked in front of his house. At the same time, he did not notice the woman herself. Considering that Kim left work around 5:15 in the evening, this was very suspicious. According to Terry, she stopped by for only a few minutes, but the story of his employee clearly contradicted this statement. Soon the police received another tip. Several witnesses reported seeing a tow truck belonging to Terry's company near the same parking lot where Kim's car was found. According to them, the tow truck was there around 6:45, which also contradicted Terry's alibi, according to which he was at home until late in the evening. But despite all this, there was still not a single solid piece of evidence against the man. The police continued to look for new leads, but ultimately this case dragged on for years. Kim's relatives continued to consider Terry guilty of her disappearance, and no one already believed that the woman would be found alive. Kim's sister also told police that Terry continued to behave strangely. One day, he called them and said that he was going to take a polygraph test to clear his name. At the same time, he added that he would most likely fail it. In addition, the man sometimes called and asked if Kim had contacted them. He said this as if the woman had simply gone somewhere and not disappeared without a trace. On top of that, someone called Kim's relatives for several years and remained silent on the phone. They were sure that Terry was behind this, but the police still could not link him to this disappearance. 3 years later, another extremely suspicious moment connected with Terry occurred. He approached Tiffany on the street and began asking if she had heard anything from her mother. Kim's sister intervened and demanded that the man leave. In response, he said something like, "Aren't you interested in what question I failed on the polygraph? The one where they asked me if I killed Kim." The woman's relatives contacted the police again, but they only replied that without solid evidence, they could not be sure of Terry's involvement. Since then, there has been no progress in this case. 8 years later, it was re-examined from scratch, but this led nowhere. Terry also stopped contacting the investigators and flatly refused to answer their questions. This went on for many years, until in early 2024, the creators of true crime documentaries became interested in the case. They decided to make an episode about Kim's disappearance and began their own investigation. The authors talked to the woman's friends and relatives and then began to study the two main suspects, Frank and Terry. As for Frank, he agreed to answer all their questions. However, even 25 years after the disappearance, he behaved rather strangely. The man still denied trying to win Kim's favor and writing her love letters. Frank once again stated that he had nothing to do with her disappearance, and the documentary makers shifted their focus to Terry. Unlike Frank, he flatly refused to talk to them, but the authors still tried to get through to him. They came to his house, but as soon as the man saw them through the window, he ran out the back door and tried to leave. However, the film crew blocked his path and Terry still answered their questions. He pretended that he simply did not notice them and was not trying to run away. Then the man began to talk about how he had no motive to kill Kim and he was not at all worried about the fact that she left him. These words contradicted the testimony of all the woman's acquaintances, who repeatedly heard from her about threats and inadequate behavior from Terry. Then the man began to contradict his initial testimony altogether. As we remember, after Kim's disappearance, he told the police that the woman stopped by to help him nail shelves. However, now he stated that Kim came to him to pick up the rest of her things that were in his house. This contradiction attracted the attention of investigators, and they decided to resume the investigation. After the documentary was released, the prosecutor's office decided on a risky move. They were going to charge Terry with murder. Given that there was still not a single unequivocal piece of evidence against the man, the chances of a conviction were extremely slim, but practically no one doubted Terry's involvement anymore. Investigators hoped that during the trial they would be able to find some new evidence, or the jury would find all the suspicious moments in Terry's behavior sufficient to pass a sentence. But while the prosecution was preparing to bring a formal charge against the man, something quite unexpected happened. After the release of the documentary, a person whose testimony became key in this case turned to the police. According to the witness, Terry personally told him that he killed his ex-girlfriend and buried her body on his property. Having received this information, the police requested a warrant to search the territory of his house and went there with a team of criminologists. They combed the area for several days, using special radars until they finally managed to make progress. The radar showed that in the floor under the bedroom, there was an area approximately the size of a human body, from which pieces of rebar had been cut out, although in the rest of the foundation, they were present. Investigators began excavations and soon discovered in the ground a blanket in which human remains were wrapped. They were handed over to experts, and they quickly confirmed what everyone already understood. It was Kim's body. Immediately after this, Terry was arrested and charged with murder. Now that the victim's body had been found under his bedroom, the prosecution finally had the necessary evidence to secure a just sentence. At the moment, 67-year-old Terry is in prison awaiting the start of the trial, which is scheduled for the spring of 2025. In addition, Kim's daughter filed a civil suit against him to seek compensation and deprived Terry of the means to finance lawyers in criminal court. It is worth noting that after the man's arrest, the original team of investigators was criticized for understandable reasons. As we remember, Kim herself told her acquaintances that if she disappeared, they should look for her on Terry's property. 25 years later, the woman's body was found exactly where she herself had assumed. At the moment, it is unknown why the man's house and its territory were not fully examined. Perhaps the police inspected the site itself and did not find any fresh traces of excavation there. It is also unknown when exactly Terry buried her under his bedroom. It is possible that he could have hidden the body somewhere else and buried it only after the police conducted a search. In any case, at the moment, the man has virtually no chance of avoiding punishment, and Kim's relatives were finally able to bury her. Thank you for watching this video, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I look forward to your comments on this situation. That was Detective STARBORN. See you soon.